Welcome everyone to a new episode of The Brief-In. Today, the episode will focus on Lebanon, the latest updates, what happens next as the current ceasefire is set to expire on the 17th of May. The ceasefire, or the so-called ceasefire, was announced on the 16th of April and came into effect on the 17th of April. However, it was immediately violated by Israel, and Hezbollah retaliated in kind. Since the ceasefire was announced, Israel has mounted dozens of airstrikes, killed countless civilians, most notably the journalist Amal Khalil in the town of Tiri, after a 6-hour ordeal under a collapsed building. Today, the New Arab has published a new exclusive reporting that Lebanon is under pressure to come up with a new disarmament plan for Hezbollah as a condition for further extending the ceasefire. As things stand, Lebanon has held 2 rounds of negotiations with Israel via its ambassador in Washington, direct negotiations this time. However, these have proven a bit divisive in Lebanese politics. They do not have the consent of all parties, and Hezbollah itself, the major party to the second major party to this war, has rejected these negotiations, throwing their fate into question. To answer these questions and analyze all of these updates, I am joined today by 2 of my colleagues in the newsroom, editor and journalist Sarah Khalil from the news desk and journalist Luay Faour from the news desk. I will start first with Sarah, just with the latest updates, the military and humanitarian picture in Lebanon primarily, but also northern Israel as well.
Mm-hmm. So despite the ceasefire that came into effect on the 17th of April, the fighting has continued between Hezbollah and Israeli forces on the ground. We just heard now that Israel just carried out more strikes in the south after issuing evacuation threats to more than a dozen villages. So the fighting is still ongoing. This is particularly in the yellow line zone, which is something similar we've seen before in Gaza.
Perhaps we should explain to our viewers what the yellow zone is and what is Israel trying to achieve.
So Israel has set up this yellow zone soon after actually the announcement of the ceasefire. And it seeks, it says it's a security buffer zone. So they're seeking to remove or eliminate Hezbollah threats from there. And the line is essentially from the blue line, which is the border of Lebanon with Israel, upwards towards Lebanon.
The Litani River.
Towards the Litani River.
Yeah.
But it covers around 55 villages, Lebanese villages.
But effectively, as most people agree, it is kind of like there is ethnic cleansing in the yellow line.
Yes.
It's not just that militants are not allowed, but also the population is not allowed to return. Correct.
Yes, so they have issued evacuation threats to those areas. We know that there are about 3,000 people still there who live there, who had refused to leave their villages. But we also know that the fighting is fierce. I mean, 2 days ago, in a village called Taif, they were ambushed by Hezbollah drones. And
the Israeli soldiers.
And it led to the killing of one soldier and injuring of 6.
And there was a lot of dramatic footage of that.
It was released both by Hezbollah and for the first time actually by the Israeli side. You know, we saw in the footage that they released the drones coming towards the helicopter that was supposed to be rescuing the soldiers, the injured soldiers.
So is it? So the Israelis there are really unable to have permanent positions. This is what Hezbollah excels at. This kind of warfare, guerrilla warfare, using various tactics to attack soldiers.
We saw that even from the 2nd March. So when this phase of the war restarted in 2nd March, which is expanded in comparison to the other phases of the war, they were almost not necessarily lured in, but they were allowed to advance, and they were met with ambushes and fire, and then they would pull back.
So in a way, this is a good development for Hezbollah's tactics, but it's not a good development for the populations
No,
there.
of course. So we've seen that Hezbollah has, although it suffered several blows from last year with the assassination of its leader, the pager attacks in 2024, and the assassination of the successor of Hassan Nasrallah, Hisham Safiyuddin. And then after that, they were also under pressure by the new Lebanese president and government, whose mandate was to disarm them.
Yeah.
And we were told, that the south of the Litani had reached a stage in December 2025 where it was clear of Hezbollah's military activities. So we thought that essentially they were weakened.
Everyone thought that.
Yes,
yeah.
even the
Including
Israelis. And we know this because even when 2nd March happened, when Hezbollah fired rockets onto Israel, the Israelis soon after declared that they would be invading up to the Litani River, which was much further than the yellow zone that they so far have now. So even they anticipated that it would be easier than what it is at the moment. So Hezbollah has definitely slowed Israel's advance in the south. However,
sorry to interrupt you, but here Hezbollah, and from what I monitor from Hezbollah media or supportive of, it seems Hezbollah's gamble is that they can improve on the ceasefire agreement from the previous war, reached in November 2024, after which Israel still managed to kill 500 Lebanese, carry out detonations without Hezbollah responding. It seems that their stated objective from initiating this war, Hezbollah, is to improve on that and establish new rules of engagement with Israel in a way that could lead to a deal where that Israel would stop violating. So far, that kind of calculation has not been proven correct, but it could still be the outcome that they'd get because they're slowing the advance. They have strong leverage with threatening the settlements in northern Israel.
yes.
Maybe speak a little bit about the northern Israeli settlements, what's happening
But
there.
I think it's also important to note that the 2nd March events of rockets being fired from Lebanon onto Israel happened 2 days after the US-Israel war started on Iran.
Yeah.
So
and the assassination of Ali
Khamenei.
Yeah.
So these are
Supreme leader.
important points to note as to why Hezbollah has resumed fighting.
But I say that because if you look at the Western media, all they say is Hezbollah did it because they want to revenge for Ali Khamenei. But then if you look at Lebanese media and what they're saying in their own media, this is what their objective is to improve. They're like seizing the opportunity of this
Yes,
war with
essentially,
Iran to improve the rules of engagement and restore Lebanon to the status quo prior to 8th of October 2023. That is what they say.
That's what they say, that Israel's attention would be divided onto two fronts. It's war with Iran, and that would be an opportunity for them to, as you say, improve their strategy move forward. But I wanted to stop at just the humanitarian toll that this has all had on the south. So far we know from 2nd March the death toll is over 2,000 people, including many civilians, children. And more importantly as well, we've seen that Israel has been targeting journalists. They have even said some journalists were Radwan Force members, and they had released images of Ali Shoaib, who was a journalist for Al-Manar, dressed in allegedly
a fake AI picture.
Yes, and then when they were asked about it, they said actually this was photoshopped. And again, we saw with Amal Khalil, who you mentioned in the intro, we know had received threats. She said she had received threats, phone calls, and she was essentially targeted. She was followed. The ambulance was prevented from arriving at the scene where the attack happened, where she was, and they only managed to retrieve her body hours later.
I think this time Amal Khalil's murder received international attention more than the previous journalists because they've killed Fatima, I forgot her last name, Ftouni, and that didn't seem to receive much attention. This time the CPJ issued statements. We published an opinion from the CPJ official. There was even a protest at the White House.
She was a veteran journalist who was known for covering in the South especially. And we know that she was, these journalists in the South, they're going to cover these violations that Israel is carrying out. But I also mentioned briefly that the ambulance was targeted, that was going to help her, to rescue her. And we know that they have been targeting ambulances. They've issued statements themselves saying ambulances will be targeted because allegedly they're carrying weapons for Hezbollah, even though those who have been hit, there's no evidence of
We've seen
weapons.
this Israeli tactic from a long time ago, much older than that. Even the second Intifada, they were hitting ambulances.
But just to quickly move on, and then I'll pass it on to Lu'ay. The Lebanon's environment minister had 2 days ago only issued a report about the humanitarian impact on the environment in the south, especially in these areas in the border villages. And she has confirmed that the attacks on historical landmarks, water resources, fish stocks, woodland, forest, oil, air quality, so essentially ecocide, alongside massacres committed against civilians.
And what is Israel's objective here? Is it to make the south similar to many parts of Gaza, uninhabitable, ethnic cleansing?
We know that they are an expansionist state. We've seen their settlers try and cross into Lebanon recently. We've seen settlers.
But they would say this is not the official position of Israel.
It's not their official position. Allegedly, it's a security zone.
The Greater Israel Dream has two supporters within the government. Famously,
one of their ministers did say at the beginning of March that the Litani would now become Israel's northern border.
Yeah, that's a long-standing dream of the Israelis. Dates back decades, and they always had some form of territorial ambitions in Lebanon. They deny it, they confirm it.
I don't think that more recently, especially under Netanyahu's leadership, he's held up maps, to world leaders.
Maybe I'll come back to you in a bit just to talk about the northern Israeli front, but I want to talk to Lu'ay a little bit about the negotiations track. So Lebanon has embarked on controversial direct negotiations.
They have,
with Israel via the Lebanese ambassador in Washington. There's been 2 rounds. There were conflicting reports about the president being invited to the White House to meet with Netanyahu. He did not confirm or deny. There is that track, the direct negotiations. There's also conflict about what's Lebanon's objectives. Israel's objectives, we know they're disarmament of Hezbollah, some form of security arrangement, even a peace treaty or something of the kind. The Lebanese seem to be saying different things about what they want. Is it just a ceasefire and armistice or a peace treaty, or would they endorse some form of Israeli plan for disarmament? So there's that track. There's also the regional track, 2 regional tracks. There's the talks between Iran and the U.S. in Pakistan, where Lebanon is a clause in the talks, and then there is a not very well known internationally Saudi Egyptian initiative that is kind of in between these 2 direct and regional tracks. Can you just brief the viewer a little bit about what are these tracks, what are they trying to achieve, how do they interact with each other?
So, as you mentioned, the ceasefire that was brokered by the United States, it came into effect on April the 17th. It was after nearly 6 weeks of fighting between Hezbollah and Israel. This was extended by 3 weeks, so the ceasefire, this current truce, is supposed to end on May the 17th if it's not extended again. And obviously, as both you and Sarah...
Just to interrupt you here, so the first ceasefire was 10 days?
The first ceasefire was 10 days. It was supposed to expire on the 26th of April, and then after the second preparatory meeting between the US and, between Lebanon and Israel's ambassadors to Washington, they met in the White House. Trump announced that this ceasefire would be extended for another 3 weeks. I don't think the Israelis even wanted a ceasefire. I mean, there were sources in Israel that were saying this ceasefire that was announced by the US kind of was imposed on us. The Israelis weren't really looking for a truce. They've been very clear from day one that they want to keep on, they want to continue their military operations in South Lebanon, and they have continued them.
They have continued them, and they seem to interpret a ceasefire as freedom of movement. But sorry to again interrupt you, but here it's probably worth talking about. There has been some kind of de-escalation, so it's not the same continuation of the tempo.
It's definitely contained. Yep.
How can you explain it?
So it's definitely contained. So I mean, we've seen Israel commit. In the 5.5 weeks nearly of the full-fledged war resuming between Hezbollah and Israel on March the 2nd, we saw Israel commit atrocities across Lebanon. There was the what has come, now known in Lebanon as Black Wednesday on April the 8th, when Israel carried out more than 100 strikes on the country in about 10 minutes. A lot of these strikes were concentrated on the capital city of Beirut. So Israel, obviously since 2024, has been attacking Beirut's southern suburbs. There have been occasional strikes on Beirut city proper. On April the 8th, there were these huge strikes on the Lebanese capital and across southern Lebanon and eastern Lebanon, which killed hundreds of people. They've been committing atrocities, obviously heavy fighting in the south. As Saad explained, a lot of the southern border region has been completely wiped off the map. Like, we're talking entire towns and villages have been razed. Israel's continuing its scorched earth policy to make the region uninhabitable, because they say that they want to create a buffer zone in this region. So, the US has been pressuring Lebanon into starting direct talks since the November 2024 ceasefire. Since Joseph Aoun became president in Lebanon and Nawaf Salam prime minister, this current administration in Beirut, there's been a lot of pressure from Washington to begin direct negotiations with Israel.
And disarm Hezbollah.
And obviously, and disarm Hezbollah. The government had begun a disarmament push in 2025 and had said that south of Litani had been disarmed. Israel had repeatedly Israeli officials, including Netanyahu, had repeatedly said, south of Lebanon is not yet disarmed. Hezbollah is lying to us. Hezbollah is lying to the Lebanese government. The Lebanese government is lying to everyone. There's a problem on both sides. And obviously it became clear that, Hezbollah, in fact, hasn't actually disarmed south of Litani. But going back to the talks, there's a lot of pressure.
Sorry here to push back a little bit on what you said. So Hezbollah does have the ability to return easily. So it doesn't have to be...
of course,
that's what we know. Like, they would mobilize, because they're guerrilla militants. They don't need permanent positions.
Also,
so
just to add, the UNIFIL had also confirmed that there was no Hezbollah military activity south of Lebanon.
So they probably did actually hand over their known fixed positions, or most of them, or a huge proportion, because we've seen the footage of their tunnels and stuff. But
a lot of them that had been...
They do retain the ability, because Lebanon is a small country, to go back. Anytime they wish to deploy, it is not...
The thing is, it's nonsensical, because Israel says that we need to clear south of Litani from Hezbollah's arms, but Hezbollah still has the capability to fire rockets technically from north of the Litani River. So if you look at the map of Lebanon, south of Litani is currently where the Israelis are deployed, but that won't stop Hezbollah from firing rockets from north of the Litani.
So again,
it doesn't make any sense.
We have stated objectives from all sides that do not match reality.
Yes.
And that is to be expected in any... But there... it's clear that Israel doesn't have a political strategy in the region.
No.
It's a purely military strategy.
Yeah.
And this is probably a symptom of that the permanent warfare that they want to remain in, they don't have a political vision for a deal with Lebanon or Gaza or Palestine. It's the same doctrine, like mowing the lawn, etc. Even Hamas in Gaza has not been disarmed. So we can't always follow the rhetoric and what's stated as reflecting
of course.
Reality. But I do want to go back to the negotiations track, if I may. So how do these direct negotiations interact with the regional? What is Lebanon's objective, in your opinion, here? The official Lebanon, the Lebanese government.
So Lebanon's stated objective. So what do both countries want? So just very quickly going back. So Lebanon had basically said that in order to begin talks with Israel, we need a truce in Lebanon. There has to be either a temporary ceasefire or a permanent ceasefire in order for Lebanese representatives to sit down with the Israelis at the negotiating table. This was a key demand by Lebanon. The US granted Lebanon this demand. They've pressured the Israelis and they said, okay, there's going to be a ceasefire. We've already discussed the fact that on the ground in South Lebanon, obviously it's largely de-escalated. The fighting is contained to the south, but the realities on the ground say there isn't actually a real ceasefire.
And Israelis are in the south.
Yes.
Staying in the south.
Yes. The Israelis have been. Only yesterday, Netanyahu and Israel's defense minister Israel Katz had made very chilling threats to Lebanon. He kind of hit a nerve, if we can say, with the Lebanese, because he said, if we don't reach a solution, then we are going to, quote, burn the cedars of Lebanon. So this is
the symbol of the country of Lebanon that is on this
exactly
national flag.
So they've made genocidal remarks before, and they keep this pressure tactic is ongoing and it has not stopped. So Lebanon's key demand was, we need a ceasefire in order to begin talks. The talks signal a shift from what's happening on the ground, from warfare to state level diplomacy. It's worth mentioning that the last time that there were high-level talks between both sides was in 1993.
The Madrid peace conference.
Yes, this was at a time when Israel was occupying South Lebanon as well. So the Lebanese government has insisted on engaging in these talks. They say that they're necessary, that we need to find an alternative track in order to end this decades-long conflict with Israel. Lebanon's stated objectives aren't just finding a temporary ceasefire with Israel and coming up with a temporary solution. They want to end the conflict. Obviously, as you mentioned, Hezbollah has very harshly criticized the Lebanese government for engaging in these direct talks.
And some of Hezbollah's points are valid, and some of them are knee-jerk reactions, rejecting any direct talks just out of principle. But there are some valid criticism. There are key differences between Madrid talks and today. So and that's something that even the Lebanese Minister of Culture said, Hassan Salame, that at the time you had more than one mediator. There was Russian mediation, European. There was Arab League involvement. Lebanon wasn't on its own. There was some collective leverage. The Israeli side had a new kind of pro-peace, if you like, administration and the person of Ishaq Rabin, later assassinated. Today, the U.S. is the only mediator. It's not an honest broker. It's not an honest mediator. It's arming Israel to the teeth. Today, there's a report that they gave a green light to recent Israeli violations of the ceasefire. And we know how close Trump is to Israel, and they're fighting side by side in Iran. Wouldn't you say that Lebanon is now in a much weaker position compared to 93,
Definitely.
Reliant on the U.S. that is not really an honest mediator, doesn't have Lebanon's interest? Isn't that a recipe for failure and internal problems, in your opinion? If Lebanon doesn't mobilize more leverage or coordination with other Arab states?
Lebanon definitely is in a much weaker position today. As you mentioned, the US has given Israel unwavering support over the past few years since the Gaza war. Obviously now their joint campaign in Iran. I think Lebanon's position with regards to the US is that maybe the only country that can sort of put a limit on Israel or contain Israel to some extent or curb Israel to some extent is probably Donald Trump's administration. Trump has said, that we need to find a solution to the Lebanon crisis. We want to end the conflict. The Israelis are saying that they want to try and reach a peace deal with Lebanon. Lebanon's focusing on a ceasefire. This is what Lebanon is saying that they want. They're saying we need a ceasefire. We want an end to Israeli strikes, an Israeli withdrawal from South Lebanon, and then leave it up to us. We will find a way to basically talk with Hezbollah in order to get Hezbollah to disarm. Israel doesn't trust this process. Israel has said that we don't trust the Lebanese government to do anything. They're too weak to confront Hezbollah. There are concerns in Lebanon that obviously putting the Lebanese government and Hezbollah face to face could lead to some internal clash.
And that Israel wouldn't mind that, by the
And
way.
obviously Israel wouldn't mind. I mean, there's been there's been a lot of talk over the past few months in terms of how Israel is trying to instigate some sort of intersectarian violence in Lebanon. I mean, we've seen when Shia communities are evacuating from South Lebanon and going to other areas, Christian, Sunni, Druze areas, Israel is assassinating, for example, an official in this area, and then it's causing backlash within these communities. So, of course, Israel wouldn't mind seeing this, but this is something that the Lebanese government and Prime Minister Nawaf Salam and Joseph Aoun have said we don't want to see happen. We don't want a confrontation with Hezbollah. They've repeated this many times. We do not want a confrontation with Hezbollah. We're not seeking a confrontation, but we need to find a solution to Hezbollah's arms. Hezbollah, on the other hand, is saying, forget discussing our arms. We're not going to surrender our weapons before Israel leaves. Lebanon is in a stalemate right now.
We have a deep crisis of trust within Lebanon that could undermine these negotiations, even if they go far and secure. There is an internal dimension. Previous negotiations under the Biden administration, the last ceasefire was negotiated by the Biden administration. We had a special envoy to Lebanon by the name of Amos Hochstein. Love him or hate him, he did manage to deliver real diplomacy. He was going back and forth. He had the ears of the administration.
I think he was a bit more pragmatic as well.
And he would start with Nabih Berri. There was a process that's open to all Lebanese in a way, well, relatively to this current process, which is quite opaque. We don't know what's going on in the talks. There's a crisis of trust. Nabih Berri has been left out so far. However, we've seen reports that they will meet tomorrow.
Yes.
Nabih Berri is the other Shia, the leader of the other big Shia party that's allied to Hezbollah, but he's more relatively more secular. He has regional relations with Saudi Arabia. He's been like classically a mediator with Hezbollah, and Hezbollah trusts him to negotiate on its behalf.
He's long been seen as the middleman.
Do you think bringing him in this week, as we've seen, there's a meeting tomorrow with Nawaf Salam and Joseph Aoun, would help all sides to reach a more unified position? Because as we reported yesterday in New Arab, the US and Saudi Arabia and other regional forces want Lebanon to have a unified position in these negotiations, which isn't the case yet. Do you think that's a positive development?
It is definitely a positive development. Saudi Arabia, I mean, we're talking about now like the regional initiatives that are happening. Saudi Arabia is directly involved now in this diplomacy track that Lebanon has decided to take. The Saudi envoy has met with
this is the Prince Yazid bin Farhan, who is in charge of the Lebanese and Syrian files in this royal court.
Quote unquote, they've met with political leaders today. The Saudi ambassador to Lebanon, Bukhari, is also meeting with religious figures in Lebanon. So when you understand the complexities and of Lebanon's consensus-based system, sectarianism, and how sort of every sect has to feel that it's a part of the process and that it's not left out.
Like the EU 27.
Yeah. It's very, I mean, what Saudi Arabia, I think, is pushing for right now is they want to see a unified stance, as you mentioned. They want to get Nabih Berri on board as currently the top Shia representative in Lebanon. I mean, I personally don't think Nabih Berri is completely against these negotiations. He has said that he's publicly come up and said that we are against direct talks with Israel, and that Israel needs to withdraw from Lebanese territory first, and they need to stop their attacks before we can start these negotiations. I think let's wait and see what happens after tomorrow's meeting. It would be very positive if Berri came out and they managed to come to some sort of understanding between the three of them, President Aoun, Prime Minister Salam, and Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri. Getting Berri on board as the Shia representative, of someone who
has Hezbollah's ears,
would definitely boost the diplomatic track that the President Aoun has decided to take now with the United States. He's definitely in an awkward position. I say he, Nabih Berri, in terms of trying to balance between not upsetting the Shia community with these talks with Israel amid ongoing violence, but also seeing the damage that this war has caused. Nabih Berri wasn't in support of this war happening.
And he's less ideological.
He's less ideological.
He is more Lebanonized, let's say, than Hezbollah.
Exactly.
I want to I'll come back to you in a minute to talk about the possibility of a peace treaty with Israel, normalization, or just an armistice and so on. But I want to just go back to Sarah for a little bit, because crucially here, Lebanon is being discussed in the US-Iranian negotiations. That was a huge part of why we got a so-called ceasefire in the first place, because the Iranians said we wouldn't open the Strait of Hormuz until there's a ceasefire in Lebanon. That's why Trump pressured Israel to declare some form of ceasefire. We've just discussed how it's not a real ceasefire or a partial ceasefire. However, that was the main impetus, despite the fact that they then put together a process to make it appear as if, no, that wasn't the result of those talks, but it was a result of Lebanese-Israeli talks. It's a bit of both, I suppose. However, now these talks have stalled. The US-Iranian talks, the Strait of Hormuz has been closed again. The US has imposed a blockade on Iranian ports. Most recently, Trump rejected the newest Iranian proposal to stagger the talks and separate the nuclear issue from the Strait of Hormuz and so on. Could we see a return to war in Lebanon at a higher tempo if the war on Iran resume, in your opinion, or has the US managed to separate these two things successfully in your view?
So we know that the Iranians did want to tie their allies in the region to any ceasefire talks, and that includes Hezbollah in Lebanon. But we also know that when Hezbollah was firing rockets onto Israel, a lot of the times these operations were in sync with Iranian operations during the war. So we know that they are sort of collaborating on that. And I do feel like if the war was to resume on Iran, it will affect Lebanon, and Lebanon, the war will continue in Lebanon as well. As I said earlier, with Lebanon, you cannot take it, from what's happening in the region. This entire war
is a regional war.
Is a regional with supporting Gaza, so-called by Hezbollah. That's how it began, and it will be ongoing.
That is quite alarming. So if the war in Iran resumes, we could see more escalation, in fact, than even compared to the previous bombing of Iran, because if we're reaching a stalemate, it's possible the US will need to escalate to then get them back to negotiate and yield. They're very far apart, these two sides. The US is insisting on a nuclear capitulation of some form by Iran. Iran is refusing. Iran wants to end the blockade just to start talking. Are you optimistic or pessimistic here about how have you been tracking like the Iranian-US talks recently?
Every time we were,
or do we all live in the Trump's mind prison?
Yes. So every time we were awaiting, an announcement by Trump, it was never what we expected it to be. So I think this is one that we definitely cannot.
We cannot predict.
We cannot predict. Yeah.
But if they do hit like Iranian civilian infrastructure like he's threatened, then Iran would hit back at Gulf infrastructure. So that escalation path, if he doesn't take the off-ramp, Trump, he will likely, in my opinion, take the off-ramp because of just the cost to the global economy. Just now the news came that the UAE is pulling out of OPEC. We are seeing permanent, irreversible changes in the nature of the oil markets and the supply chains. If he were not to take the off-ramp and escalate, then the Iranians will hit things they didn't hit before, and they could things could escalate in Lebanon again, sadly. Maybe just let's talk a little bit about the internal dimension of the negotiations, just to pick up from what Luay said. Realistically, could you see a path in which Hezbollah could agree to disarm? If yes, then what would be its conditions? Is that feasible in your view?
I do not think Hezbollah would ever give up its arms.
In any scenario?
In any
opinion?
scenario. I do not see that happening. But I think it's also important to note a bit of history with Lebanon. So the Lebanese state never really existed in Lebanon.
Outside of Beirut, probably.
Outside of Beirut, exactly. I mean, you're from the north, you know that those areas are very impoverished and there's hardly any, state services. Similarly, in the south, people of the south never really had any faith in a state that was mostly absent. We're talking schools, hospitals, very basic infrastructure and so on. And then we have the added bonus of neighboring Israel. So Hezbollah has filled that gap and has therefore a lot of support base there.
So in order for Hezbollah to disarm, what you're saying is it has to be such a revolutionary change in the Lebanese state and social compact.
Yes, and the Lebanese army as well, because if the army is not strong enough as it is at the moment, it's very weak. This is essential suicide to give up your arms, and we know this from
for Hezbollah.
For Hezbollah, yeah, we know this from other more recent examples. In Iraq and Libya, you essentially giving up your arms equates to these guarantees are never.
You're encouraging them to invade again.
Essentially, yeah, these written guarantees or ceasefires, as we know with Israel as well, they never really abide by them. But we also know that they have this intention of expanding onto Lebanon. They've had previous operations named after the Litani River with the intention of occupying and invading onto there. So I do not believe that Hezbollah would ever give up its arms, and even if the Lebanese state came into some agreement.
I think let's just explore as a thought exercise. You say ever, but I think what you're really saying is the change in Lebanon, the deal for disarmament would have to be so revolutionary.
And take a very long time as well.
And take a long time. Let's try to imagine what that could look like. So first there is the there's the political governance system, which Lebanon now is in the Third Republic, if I'm not mistaken. The Lebanese current republic is the Third Republic. The first one was from 1920 until independence. The second one was from independence until the end of the Civil War. And this current republic in Lebanon, the new constitution, came about from the Civil War, the end of the Civil War, 1990, under the Taif Agreement. There were many reforms in the Taif Agreement to make the system more representative. The previous system had kind of favored certain sectarian communities over others. It had reforms for elections, phasing out sectarianism in the system, disarming everyone except the national army, to which Hezbollah in theory agreed to. So there's that aspect. There's also the reconstruction aspect. There's been so much damage to Lebanon in the last 2 rounds of fighting that would take tens of billions of dollars to just rebuild what was there, let alone improve it. There is also the aspect of what you just said, the army. So the Lebanese army is more like a National Guard force. It doesn't have the equipment, the training, or the doctrine to defend the borders from.
I mean, we saw it pull back as soon as the Israelis started to
But
invade.
they cannot even fight.
Yes.
It would be suicide if they
back,
stayed. So it's not just about their willingness to fight. They could be willing to fight, but they don't lack the equipment, they lack the training, they lack the doctrine, the national defense doctrine. It's more of a National Guard police force, really, that you send when there's riots or something like that. Even then, they like more peacekeepers. So what you're saying is you have to change 3 big things that took decades to change previously in order for Hezbollah to even consider it. Would you see with these new initiatives, the new arrangements in the region, would you see any kind of signs that this could happen or is on the table?
So Hezbollah, we know from their rhetoric that they've repeatedly said they would not give up its weapons in the foreseeable future. Its leader, Secretary General Naim Qassem, has repeatedly refused this idea, saying this is, our resistance tools. this is what gives us power. I don't see that there would be a scenario where they would give up their arms.
But they have previously, under Hassan Nasrallah, considered the idea, and there was the big process of dialogue, the national defense strategy. I think what they're saying now is like, until there's a ceasefire and full withdrawal, we're not going to even talk about it. But they're not saying ever, never.
But even then, so we've seen this happen before. They do enter agreements, and they maintain their weapons. So I think it will take many years until we see a strong state, a strong army. Then perhaps they would then give up their arms.
Maybe I'll go back to Lu'ay here, because this Taif agreement is kind of suddenly being talked about by Saudi Arabia as a solution to...
As a more of a comprehensive
Can you explain why
solution?
the Taif agreement is relevant to negotiations with Israel? How do these two topics link up in this specific context?
So just for viewers that don't know, the Taif agreement, named after the city of Taif in Saudi Arabia, was essentially the agreement that ended Lebanon's 15-year multifaceted civil war. It was supposed to see the disarmament of all militias in the country, including both Lebanese and Palestinians in Palestinian camps. It was supposed to see Lebanon gradually move away from political sectarianism, establish a Senate and a more decentralized system where more powers are given to other areas in the country and they're not just focused in Beirut.
And development money as well.
Development money, which is part of decentralization when we say that. Most of that agreement hasn't been implemented, and that agreement also is, it's important to note, it was incorporated into our constitution, into our Lebanese constitution post-civil war. Hezbollah was retained its weapons because it said that we're a resistance fighting the Israeli occupation.
I think there was an exception made for resistance.
There was an exception.
In Taif.
And then after the year 2000, when the Israelis left South Lebanon, the discussion over Hezbollah's arms became more of a divisive issue in Lebanon between political factions, especially after the end of the Syrian occupation in 2005. So this is where we remember where the country was basically split into two camps, the pro-Iran Hezbollah-backed 8 March camp and then the Saudi US-backed 14 March camp. So fast forward today, Saudi Arabia has always held on to the Taif agreement as something that they see will sort of save Lebanon. Like, this was the agreement that was supposed to be implemented more than 30 years ago. This was supposed to rebuild the state, rebuild the institutions after the civil war.
And the Lebanese headache that keeps coming back for everyone.
Exactly. So Saudi Arabia, as the key, one of the key peace brokers at the time, has always held on to the Taif agreement despite its ins and outs in Lebanon. The relationship, our relationship with Saudi Arabia has been through, it's been a bit bumpy over the past few years because of Hezbollah, but Saudi Arabia has always held on to the Taif agreement. And now with Saudi Arabia's involvement in Lebanon, trying to bring the Lebanese leaders together to have a unified stance regarding the negotiations with Israel, the Taif is at the core of this because it includes the key issue of disarmament. Sarah was talking about Hezbollah refusing to disarm. You obviously mentioned that Hezbollah has said that we will only discuss disarmament once Israel pulls out. As I previously mentioned, we are in a deadlock because both sides, whether the Israelis or Hezbollah, they're engaged in fighting. Neither side up until now is accepting to sort of offer any concessions. Hezbollah is definitely not willing to offer concessions because they think that the Lebanese government has already offered the United States and Israel too much by drawing up a plan to disarm Hezbollah. They see themselves as kind of the only guarantor of Lebanon's security at the moment.
But isn't it what Saudi is saying here?
Yeah.
With the Taif, is saying if you disarm, will help implement the rest of it, and is that being used as a kind of carrot for Hezbollah? Is there some subtext here about the Lebanese system where, like, there's
revamping the Lebanese system and possibly giving Hezbollah something
political,
in return, some political
consolation prize in return.
In return for giving up their weapons. I mean, look, in Lebanon, there's always different sects and different sectarian leaders and their political parties. There is always concern among certain factions in Lebanon, especially among the Christians, that any change to the Taif Agreement and any change to this current system will take away more from the Christians.
More political representation.
More political representation and power as it did post civil war, because before the civil war and before the Taif Agreement, the Christians and especially the Maronites had much more power. The president had more prerogatives. The Christians had more seats in parliament. Then we saw an equal split between Muslims and Christians. I think any implementation of the Taif Agreement would definitely include some amendments, because, I mean, there are loopholes in this agreement. There are things that need to be addressed to sort of give guarantees to different sects.
And lots of things have changed.
Lots of things have changed.
One of the key changes is the other guarantor of this agreement was the Assad regime, the Hafiz al-Assad regime,
which is no longer there.
Gone.
Yep.
So the Taif Accord was designed around Syrian interests in Lebanon, as well as Saudi or international American interests and so on, as well as ending the war. And that has changed. So like the Syrian part of the equation and Syria's interests, which included, if you remember, linking Lebanon and Syria in any negotiation with Israel, was kind of part of this deal.
Mm-hmm.
Lebanese foreign policy, as it relates to these things, was was part of Syria, and Saudi would take over the economy. That was kind of the unspoken division of labor. This has gone, so this is why it needs updating.
I mean, the regional dynamics have shifted dramatically in just the past couple of years with Israel's war in Lebanon, Hezbollah losing a lot of the power it once had in Lebanon and the grip it sort of had on the Lebanese government, in which Hezbollah could sort of call the shots and make the decisions. Like we said, today the Lebanese government is insisting on going to these negotiations with Israel, despite Hezbollah's very strong opposition. We mentioned Nabih Berri, Hezbollah's Shia ally in Lebanon, the Speaker of Parliament. Seeing Nabih Berri's position, maybe after tomorrow's meeting with the President and Prime Minister, that would be interesting to see
we should look
where
out for
Nabih Berri where Nabih Berri stands in these negotiations. So just a sort of recap: Saudi Arabia is pushing to implement the Taif Accord, I think, as part of a comprehensive solution to the Lebanese crisis, as a package deal, as we like to say, disarming Hezbollah. Obviously,
or a plan to disarm Hezbollah.
A plan to gradually disarm Hezbollah. I mean, there are Lebanese officials, including our culture minister Ghassan Salemi, recently told Sky News that, the government has begun with the plan to disarm Hezbollah, but this isn't something that happens overnight. This isn't something that just takes days and weeks. This is something that takes a very long time. You're talking about a militant group which has been arming for more than 40 years, a militant group which has built institutions for itself in southern Lebanon and in Beirut's southern suburbs, and in areas where it has influence. We're talking...
So what you're saying, what we're all saying here is Hezbollah needs to consent to its own disarmament. It cannot be done by force. And in order for it to consent, there has to be some kind of local and regional deal. So it gets quite complicated. A local deal would involve alterations to the political system or reinforcement of the existing political post-Civil War order. A regional deal of some kind.
Involving Iran, of course.
Involving
where Iran is key.
Involving investing in reconstruction, or at least not blocking it, because let's not forget Lebanon is not allowing Iran to fund reconstruction as part of U.S. pressure. So either investing in Lebanon or at least allowing Iran to send money officially. There also needs to be a U.S. approved arrangement with Israel. This could be a peace treaty, which is very divisive in Lebanon. Or a security arrangement of the kind that Syria has been trying to negotiate with Israel. So there are three components, big three components even to get to a stability in Lebanon.
Yeah.
Maybe just speak a little bit to what are the chances of a peace treaty versus armistice with Israel and to that side.
I mean, just to comment very quickly on the issue on reconstruction. I mean, for years now, especially under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, the GCC, or the 6 Gulf states led by Saudi Arabia, have made it very clear that there's no more free money for Lebanon, that any reconstruction money, any financial support for Lebanon has to be joined with the state actually having real control over all of Lebanon's territory.
But it's a chicken and egg thing, because then
Yes.
the Hezbollah is saying we will not do this until we have pledge of reconstruction, and then the Gulf are saying there's no pledge of reconstruction until you disarm.
I don't
So
think
it's quite a chicken and egg situation.
Yes, I don't think any country anymore is willing to invest a dime in Lebanon, knowing that the country could find itself in yet another war with Israel, let's say 5, 10, 15 years down the line. Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Iran invested heavily in Lebanon in 2006 after the month-long war with Hezbollah and Israel. And then unfortunately, more than 16 years down the line, we find ourselves now in another war with
But
Israel.
Israel bears the majority of that responsibility.
Of course.
They are the one destroying.
Of course, which is why we need to find a solution, which is why Saudi Arabia, I think today, they're talking to Iran, they're talking to Lebanese factions, including the Shias in Lebanon, which is why they want to find a durable final solution to this problem where the weapons are in the hands of the Lebanese government. And you mentioned how likely is it that Lebanon could reach some sort of peace treaty with Israel?
Actually, let's talk about that a little bit. Maybe we'll do some scenarios to what could happen. But I want to just go back to Sarah a little bit to talk about
Sure.
because it's linked to reconstruction. Maybe tell us a little bit about the extent of the damage and that Israel has inflicted in this round and the previous round. What kind of bill is Lebanon looking at for reconstruction, economic and humanitarian? And maybe after that we'll talk a little bit about what happens next and how could this end, good, best case scenarios and worst case scenarios.
So the cost on the war so far since 2 March only has exceeded 3 billion in direct damages. These are infrastructure. We've seen Israel hit key bridges in the south, and indirect losses at about 2 to 3 billion as well. So the finance minister has estimated that Lebanon is losing 1.5 billion per week with this war. So we are looking at a hefty bill. And as we mentioned earlier, this is all happening during Lebanon's economic crisis as well. So funds would be much needed. But prior to that, we are yet to see what's going to happen in the south. Are the Israelis really looking at withdrawing? We know that their goals so far have not been met. They've declared this week, and previously their 2 stated objectives, disarming Hezbollah. They've said this is not going to be possible unless we occupy all of Lebanon. And the second goal, which is the security of the northern residents of Israel. We've seen that there's been an uproar this week, especially. There's been a strike of schools. So in the previous phase of the expanded war in 2024, those residents were evacuated, and their return was seen as an achievement of the Israeli government. And so the Israeli government is really reluctant to issue evacuation orders again for the north.
And
but
they're
we know
angry, and
they're angry, and even the press this morning was, the headlines were talking about, and where do we go from here, essentially. So their war on Lebanon is generally seen as not bringing the outcome that they want. There's no security. Hezbollah is continuing its attacks. So
time is not on the Israel side here. In fact, they might, because we've seen them changing the goalposts before. And I think just before we went in, I saw some new statements by Katz, by the Israeli foreign minister. Is he the foreign minister or the defense minister?
Katz is defense minister.
The defense minister. He was starting to change a bit the language. He was saying not disarmament of Hezbollah. He was saying drone and missiles, removing Hezbollah drones and missiles. So you can see some shifts in their goals because they set maximalist goals. Disarmament is not possible. Degrading now is we've seen this kind of pattern before.
Yeah.
Degrading their capabilities. Because of the negotiations, I think they will maintain pressure on Hezbollah to secure like the best outcome negotiations. But it slowly is going to go towards potentially a renewal of the ceasefire, or the de-escalation rather than ceasefire. But even then, if there is no deal, a political arrangement, regional backed, we will just go back to status quo with thousands of houses destroyed, a huge economic hit to Lebanon, a huge setback for the government and the Hezbollah really, and the population and the civilians. So I just want to understand like here, what are the scenarios? Maybe let's talk about the best case, the worst case for what happens next come 17 May, and something maybe in the middle. So would you agree that the worst case scenario would be the continuation and escalation of war should that war with Iran return?
Yep.
What would that mean for Lebanon? Already Lebanon is reeling. What could even, how bad could things get?
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that there's going to be elections in Israel in October, and so this page needs to be turned somehow should Netanyahu, and his party seek another term. And we know there is a lot of opposition to continuing the war on Lebanon. However, there is the reality that this is an endless cycle. We've seen this throughout history. Israel attacks, invades, prior to Hezbollah even existing. So it's an endless cycle. There will be times where there's a ceasefire, things are going normal, and then there will be times where a new party takes over in Israel that seeks, this expansionist idea.
So you think that is the worst case scenario?
Pushes the rise. Yes. So the worst case scenario in Lebanon, I do not see a disarmament without a peaceful one, and therefore, hopefully unlikely, but therefore there would be civil strife. However, hopefully with the elections happen in Israel, that kind of brings it to a close, and then the discussion of Hezbollah becomes an internal one.
Just in Lebanon.
Just in Lebanon. Reconstruction is probably the next. We've got the detainees who are held in Israeli prisons as well.
How many Lebanese detainees?
So there are over 20, I believe. Hezbollah has been very muted during this phase of the war. So we know the Israelis have said they've captured some of their fighters, but Hezbollah has never confirmed anything. So we don't know the exact numbers yet, but we know for sure there are at least 20. There has been protests by their families in previous months, calling for the government. And we know that Joseph Aoun, this is one of the key issues that he raises in talks, which is the return of these detainees.
They are also holding Syrian citizens. And recently there's been a protest in Damascus also to pressure the Shara government to include that as a demand in negotiations with Israel. There is also a report saying Hezbollah is looking to capture Israeli soldiers to try to capture to
exchange,
to do a prisoner exchange. So that could even escalate things further if that were to happen after the Gaza captive crisis. So that's the worst case scenario. The war escalates. Israel pursues a greater Israel plan in Lebanon. The yellow line remains. It turns into occupation. There's no reconstruction. Hezbollah returns to what used to be in the 80s. Already yesterday they said they would return to suicide attacks. Similar to the 80s. That could be quite grim for everyone involved. Maybe Lu'ay, walk us through what could be a best case scenario?
I mean,
where what we discussed earlier about political these things that change.
A best case scenario.
And what is, sorry to interrupt, but what is also required to get there? What every side should really do here?
I mean, ideally, what every side should do is Israel should obviously withdraw from South Lebanon, stop its attacks, and then Hezbollah and the Lebanese government should come to some sort of, through dialogue, through some sort of understanding in where Hezbollah could gradually disarm. Till this day, this seems obviously very unlikely. A best case scenario is the ceasefire is extended, or maybe a permanent ceasefire is reached with Israel. Some sort of political settlement is reached with regional and international backing. Again, we spoke about Saudi Arabia's.
Does it have to be political settlement, or can it be a security settlement?
I think they'll go hand. I think they go hand in hand. I think if we're talking about Lebanon internally, Lebanon's domestic politics, there has to be a political settlement. Iran is obviously involved. I mean, if the US-Iran talks and the Lebanon-Israel talks, despite statements that have been made from Beirut that we are the talks with Israel are separated from the US-Iran diplomacy happening in Pakistan, I think they're inseparable, because we're talking about Hezbollah in Iran. Hezbollah is Iran's biggest regional asset. I think Hezbollah and Lebanon in general is
ally.
Okay, ally, and I mean, some people call them a proxy, some people call them an ally. So I think Lebanon is being used as possibly a bargaining chip in the US-Iran talks. This is obviously something Lebanese officials have come out against and said that only Lebanon talks for Lebanon. So best case scenario is there is a ceasefire, a permanent one. A political settlement is reached in Lebanon with Hezbollah, but also Israel agrees somehow miraculously to withdraw from South Lebanon. Another scenario, which I think we've already mentioned, is contained violence like we see happening now in the south.
So no further escalation, but like a return to pre-2 March situation.
Pre-2nd of March, where there was supposed to be a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, and obviously Israel violated that ceasefire hundreds of times. Diplomacy, maybe ongoing diplomacy with attempts for a breakthrough as attacks continue in the south, but no real breakthrough. And obviously you've already spoken about worst case scenario where negotiations completely collapse. Israel resumes its attacks on the south, possibly Beirut and Beirut's southern suburbs and other areas, and things just basically get worse from there. Lebanon is not a standalone in this. It's part of a wider regional deadlock. What happens in Iran will have implications on Lebanon, unfortunately, and could impact Lebanon because obviously the Hezbollah factor. So I think we just have to wait and see what happens in the next few days. You mentioned the meeting, the meeting that Trump is trying to push between Aoun and Netanyahu. I think
there's a bit of Saudi push against that, because we've seen some Saudi-linked political figures in Lebanon, traditionally allied with Saudi, such as former Prime Minister Fuad Sinura, rejected.
Major Sunni allies of Saudi Arabia and Lebanon.
Yes,
yeah.
And he was involved in the 2006. He was Prime Minister during the 2006 war. He was involved in those ceasefire talks at the time with Tony Blair and George W. Bush, Condoleezza Rice. So when someone like that, who's considered a Hezbollah hawk, he's a hawk on Hezbollah, comes out strongly against meeting with Netanyahu, that tells you something, that there is the Saudis perhaps don't want Lebanon to go ahead of them in any. They want Lebanon to remain within the fold of like the coordinated Arab initiative,
Arab peace initiative,
and not the Abraham Accord.
Correct.
Camp.
I don't think Lebanon. I mean, Aoun rejected to speak to Netanyahu in a phone call the other week. I think Washington was trying to set up a phone call between Netanyahu and Aoun. Aoun rejected that phone call. Aoun knows the implications that would have. I mean, the backlash it would have already right now. Like we've already discussed, there's fierce opposition from Hezbollah against these talks, even though, I mean, dare I say, maybe most Lebanese are in support of what the government is doing, because, I mean, even people that, even Hezbollah support base, I mean, everyone is tired from this war. People are displaced. Destruction is ongoing.
No one wants war.
No one wants war.
No one wants war.
But I
except
think
the Israeli population
yes,
seems to.
no one
like
wants
war.
war. But I
Oh.
think the Lebanese government has been very careful in saying that we're striving. When they say we're striving for a peace deal with Israel, that doesn't necessarily mean full-blown normalization. I don't think Lebanon is in any rush to forge a normalization deal with Israel, and that falls under the Arab Peace Initiative, which was agreed in 2002 in Beirut, which basically agrees to normalization with Israel in return for a Palestinian statehood, which I think
and full withdrawal from all
full withdrawal
Arab
from
territories.
all
That
Arab
would include
territories.
the Golan Heights and South Lebanon.
The Syrian
in
Golan
theory,
Heights.
so
I mean, obviously,
gets complicated.
so far Syria is. I think the talks there are ongoing, but they sort of reached hit a dead end in the Syria talks.
Perhaps
with Israel.
just to.
But I think Lebanon.
I
sorry,
think we're
just
running out of time. So just to wrap things up, I think it would be very difficult anyway to make any such deal with Netanyahu. Something that Sarah spoke about.
under this current government.
It has to be different leadership.
Also,
in
we need to
Israel.
remember that he's wanted by the ICC, and
He's
I
a-
think even countries who have normalized, so that they had the King of Morocco, Jordan, they don't sit with Netanyahu. So I really doubt Joseph found
So until the
correct.
Israeli elections in October produces a new government, if that happened, because he's still I think polls show him still would win the biggest party, but not an outright majority. Until a huge political change happens in Israel that would go back to even the bare minimum of diplomacy, not this military doctrine, Netanyahu, the Gaza doctrine, Dahi doctrine, whatever. It's quite difficult to see that Lebanon would reach a deal. So we're talking about a process. We're talking about something similar with the Palestinian Authority. That has huge pitfalls for Lebanon, because if it doesn't get it right, if it doesn't set the correct objective, if it doesn't have enough guarantees from its friends and allies, if it goes alone without mobilizing its leverage, Lebanon risk end up like the Palestinian Authority, just in an endless process with Israel just demands more and then changes the.
Look, I think in my opinion, the Israeli officials have said this. They've said that the disarming Hezbollah by force is very unrealistic, and this could lead to a war of attrition that could last, who knows, for years maybe. I think that, in my opinion, eventually there has to be some sort of political settlement in which both sides have to understand that this war can't last forever. And there needs to be some sort of understanding, maybe not under Netanyahu. I mean, if Lapid wins the elections in Israel, maybe it's worth mentioning that it was under the Lapid government where Lebanon and Israel signed the maritime deal in 2002. So there has been diplomacy, mediated diplomacy between...
And there's some form of Israeli compromise here, really, realistically. Yes. Not total compromise, but it wasn't a total surrender by Lebanon. It was a compromise that they would... And Netanyahu government wanted to go back on that.
Exactly. And they've already, his energy minister, Cohen, has, repeatedly said that we want to try and scrap that deal. It's not, it's easier said than done. They can't just...
it's US guaranteed.
Yes. So it was under Lapid where Lebanon... So there has been mediated diplomacy between Lebanon and Israel several times before. But obviously what's very controversial, what's very... different about these now is that there are direct talks. Lebanon and Israel are sat at the table together.
But it's only at the level of ambassadors. It's not really.
It's
So
not
negotiations are yet.
Sorry, just tell us a little bit. If these, because these negotiations are to prepare for negotiation. They're
Correct.
not negotiations. Well, at least that's what they tell us.
Preparatory meetings.
So they would form a real delegation that has some powers, that has some representation. Can you just walk us through what that could be?
So as mentioned earlier, Lebanon and Israel have held 2 preparatory meetings in Washington. The second meeting was supposed to happen at the State Department, and I think last minute from what we read, they
went to the White House, didn't they?
The meeting then was moved to the White House, and Donald Trump personally was present. So it kind of indicates that Washington is taking on a much bigger role in these talks. And that they want to reach some sort of agreement between Lebanon and Israel. I think what's aggravated Hezbollah even more in these talks is that the joint statement said that the problem that Lebanon and Israel have in common is Hezbollah. So this has caused even more division in Lebanon with Hezbollah versus the government. They're still in the process of preparing for when the actual negotiations will happen, so full-fledged negotiations between Lebanon and Israel. I think, again, we need to see what the outcome of the meeting is between Birri, the Shia representative, and Aoun and Nawaf Salam is, where Birri stands in this process. I think this is what Saudi Arabia is trying to do, bring Lebanese officials together to go to these negotiations with a unified position. And like we've already said, under the Arab Peace Initiative, which calls for normalization in return for Israel returning occupied Arab lands. It's very complicated. Lebanon is at a crossroads. I don't think Lebanon has been in such a difficult position in many, many decades. I mean, we're seeing dramatic changes happening in the region, massive changes happening in Lebanon. I think we need to see how things unravel in the coming days and weeks and months.
So that tomorrow's meeting will be crucial in this. It's a crucial step towards a Lebanese internal arrangement.
Specifically to understand Birri's position on these talks.
So that could carry some good news, a positive development, where like sides in Lebanon step back from their sharp divisions, reach a unified position. I want to end with one question about European role post-UNIFIL, because if, let's say, there is some form of deal with Israel, either a security or a ceasefire or whatever form it is, this war has to end. Like, there's no... Israel will run out of ammunition. Like, any no war can last forever. It could be low-tempo strikes like they've been doing, but it cannot be sustained with these deployments and the northern of Israel issue. So in order for it to end, we will need some form of peacekeeper force. Now, UNIFIL's mandate is ending at the end of this year. Recently, Kaya Kalas in the informal EU summit said that Europe would want to play a role in the arrangement in the UNIFIL. Not under a UN mandate, maybe a European force. Could you see that potentially accepted by Hezbollah as a peacekeeping force? Hezbollah has not been really... they're not big fans of UNIFIL, but they've worked with them. Recently, 2 UNIFIL French soldiers were killed allegedly by Hezbollah. Hezbollah denied it.
And also they've been targeted by Israeli strikes
and
as
they've
well.
been, of
so
course, targeted.
Also,
but those specific soldiers, Macron directly accused Hezbollah. Israel has attacked the UN, we should say that, and they've committed massacres.
I think as we've seen with like the mechanism that was set up as an observer force, they probably will be willing, if it leads to a permanent ceasefire. That's what they're after anyway, a permanent ceasefire, and a few other points that we had mentioned so far. I don't see that Hezbollah, we haven't seen anything to indicate that they would object to something like this if it leads to...
But they might want to see their mandate. What exactly? Because if they have a mandate to search, to like more mandate, because UNIFIL wasn't allowed to go without Lebanese army escort. So maybe that will also be part of these negotiations. Okay, who's going to implement it? What mandate will they have? That adds a layer of complexity.
Yeah, but generally as a foreign presence in the south to monitor events, I don't think they've had any objections to that. But as you say, of course, with certain limits, that maintains sort of their privacy and but eventually, hopefully, if we do reach a situation where there is a permanent ceasefire, then we would have the issue of the arms to deal with as well. So that may not be an issue.
Maybe one final word to Lu'ay. What do you think the viewer should look out for next? This week, we talked this week will be the internal dimension. Yesterday, we published an exclusive news report saying that if Lebanon doesn't come up with the unified plan by the 17th of May for disarmament, that the Saudis would wash their hands clean of helping Lebanon and will be left to its fate. That was the report we published, quoting diplomatic sources with the talks. What do you think? Do you think realistically Lebanon could develop such a unified plan? No matter what it says, it could say we'll disarm in 10 years and 2 years, but do you think that could happen realistically to end on a hopefully on optimistic note?
I mean, if we're ending on an optimistic note, I don't think. I don't think Saudi Arabia will completely abandon Lebanon, and I think what we need to look out for is, there are worries that this truce, this contained violence in the south, could completely collapse any day now, because the Israeli officials have been threatening to resume their attacks and saying that we need to basically fight harder against Hezbollah. I mean, there's as we discussed, that worst case scenario happening. I think very intense talks happening right now. I mean, whether between Lebanese officials, between the Saudis and the Lebanese officials. Lebanon is ready to go to these talks with Israel. Obviously, they want to try and get Nabih Berri on board, as we've already discussed. I think Berri himself will be key in this, as being the middleman between the president and the government, and between Hezbollah. I think if anyone is able to sort of reason and talk to Hezbollah, it will be Nabih Berri.
Amazing point to end that, and we pray for the long life of Nabih Berri, who's 86 years old.
To enable to achieve this, yeah.
Absolutely, we need him. We need you, Nabih Berri, right now. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of The Brief-In. Please follow us on YouTube, subscribe to our channel. This episode will also be posted as an audio-only podcast. Don't forget to also follow our website, newarab.com, for the latest on this war and the Iran war and all kind of Middle East focused journalism from an insider perspective. Thank you all.